right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicolas. I'm the tech lead for Android Studio design tools and the constraint layout library. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So you might have noticed we released a really cool navigation editor. We are not going to talk about that today, but there was a session this morning. It's on YouTube. Check it out. There is Code Labs. It's really cool. So we are going to talk about the layout editor, the work we've been working on, the entire team this past year, the improvements we made. Specifically, we'll focus on sample data, which is something really cool we shipped in 3.2. And we'll also talk about Constraint Layout 2.2 and what's coming up with this library. For the section on the layout editor, Vadim and Diego are going to present you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So to start with, we're going to talk about the layout editor. Most of you are probably quite familiar with the tool. So it's a graphical tool that enables you to build your layout without having to write any XML. And it's supposed to make you more productive. So what is nice with the layout editor is that it also works with your custom views. So if in your code you have a custom view, it will render in the layout editor. And the nice thing is that any custom view from your project will appear in the palette. So our goal is really to make you more productive. So we've added some nice features this year to do so. Yep. The first one I want to talk about is the conversion. So if you right-click on a view, you will see the Convert View option that will make this pop-up appear. And you will be able to select one of the preset components, or you can use the edit text just to pick any view from your project. And this view is contextual. So if you right-click on a view which is not a view group, we will show some preset of non-view group views. The next thing I want to talk about is the navigation between include layout and their parent. So in the component tree or in the preview, if you double-click on a component on an include tag, it will jump automatically to the children. And if you click on the arrow on the top of the component tree, it will jump back to the parent. This is quite handy to go fast between two layouts. The layout editor is really powerful used with constraint layout. And constraint layout is a great layout because it's very powerful, but it's very verbose, right? So you might not want to write all your XML by hand. So what you should do instead is take advantage of all the menus we have in the layout editor to generate this XML for you. So again, right-click on a view, and then you can use the align any of the top options to choose your option. And we have many of them, so feel free to check them after this session, and really it's going to make you more productive. But most of you are probably populating your layout at runtime. You have data from the internet, and you want to populate them. So they are not rendered in the layout editor. So to solve this issue, Diego is going to come here and talk about the sample data.
Thanks, Vadim. So before we talk about sample data, let's talk a little bit about tools attributes. So the tools attributes are the XML attributes that you actually use to give additional information to the Android Studio and to the layout editor. You are probably familiar with many of them. We are not going to talk about all of them. Let's cover one example just to be clear on this. So you probably have seen this. So in your strings file, you get a lint warning saying that you haven't translated a particular string. Usually what you want to do is to fix this error, you translate it, and that's it. The error is gone. But there might be valid reasons why you don't want to translate actually this string. It could be that it's the name of the application, and you don't want to translate it in every single language, only in certain languages. So what you can do here is you basically can tell Android Studio, look, I know about this error, but I don't want you to tell me about it because it's fine. So that is one example. There are many others. But what we want to talk about now is actually design time attributes. This is just a subset of the tools attributes that I talked about that are giving additional information and context to the layout editor. So let's see it with one example. So in this case, what we have is we created our toolbar. We edited the layout on its own. So we use ConstraintLayout. We created it. And this is how it will look in the layout editor. So what you can see is the toolbar without any context. So you can see the layout, but you don't know how it's going to look at runtime in your application. So there is something that we can do. You can, again, tell the layout editor, this layout is going to be included in this other layout that I'm hinting here. So using this attribute, tools showing, we are letting the layout editor know that we want to embed this header into the main layout. And that way, we can see it in context. So now, when we are editing, we know if the colors match. We can actually tweak our design and see how every change impacts our layout. And the best thing is, again, you can do it. You can edit it right there. You don't have to see it with a blank space or anything like that. So let's see another interesting use of design time attributes. When you add a text view, this is usually what you get. So you have hello world, and that's it. But you can tell to the layout editor that you know that this text view is going to look slightly different at runtime. And you do that by, again, using the tools namespace. So in this case, what we are doing is we are replacing both the text and the text color. And we are telling the layout editor, at runtime, this is going to look different. And we are about to see how this is very useful. Let's go with a slightly more complicated example. When you add a recycler view, this is what you get by default. It takes the space. You can see how the recycler view is going to be laid out. But it's not very useful. It doesn't help you to actually come up with a good design for it. It's just a list of elements with a lot of empty space. So again, we can use the tools attributes to basically let the layout editor know, this is the layout that I'm going to use. So you have probably seen already list item many times. Very simple. You just say it. But we can do other things. We can tell the layout editor, OK, how is this going to look with 5 elements? All these things, you usually cannot do them in the layout editor, because these are things that happen at runtime. So usually the source of information for a recycler view is an adapter. So the adapter might depend on network, on database, on many things that we don't have available at design time. So doing this, you give us context, and then the layout editor will render correctly, similar to what you have at runtime. So let's now go into sample data. So sample data is a feature that we introduced in 3.0. And what it does is it helps you to actually populate data that is not available at design time. So in this case, what we are doing is telling the layout editor that I want to use the tint property, and I want to get the data from this data source, which we call @sample/material colors. And that data source is simply a file, a plain file, with a list of colors that you see there. So what happens at design time is the layout editor will get a different color for every item. So that looks better, but we can do more. So let's see how you create that file. You go to your project, new, sample data directory. And that is how we create the directory where we are going to put every data source that we have. In our case, we want to create material colors. So new file. And then we name it material_colors. And we just put the list of colors. And that's it. It's that simple. Now you can use it in any property, in this case, tint. So this is one of the types of data sources that you can use in sample data. So it's basically a list of colors. You can have lists of any kind that you want, like regular text, and you just replace it in your text view. But you can have other things more interesting, like you can have dimensions. So if you have dimensions, using the tools attributes, you can tell the layout editor, I want to use this dimension, and I want it to be different for every item. And you can do that using sample data. We also have other types of data sources. You can have images. You create it in a very similar way. What you do is you create, instead of a file, you create a directory, and then you drop all your images in there. And then recycler view will get a different image for every item. So it's very simple. And the last type that I want to tell you about is JSON files. So JSON files is a similar way to the list that we had before, but it allows you to do something that you cannot do with lists. You can have all your data together in one place. You can add maybe context about why a particular item is like that. Or you can even get a sample from your dev API and put it into the sample data. In this case, what we have is a list of nodes. So what you can see is we have a title and we have an author. And the way that you use this in sample data is you can reference any of those live elements. Let's see how to do that. So in this case, what we are telling the layout editor is, I want you to replace text at design time, and I want you to do it with @sample / the name of the JSON file, and then the node that we saw before. So in this case, we are doing it with title and author. Remember that this will change depending on the name of the JSON file. It doesn't even need to be called JSON. But if you don't want to provide your own data sources, Android Studio will also provide, it already comes with a set of predefined ones. So you don't have to create your own. We give you a set of them. We give you names. We give you lorem ipsum, obviously. And we also give you a set of images. For example, you can use avatars. And you don't even need to create images. You can just use the ones that we give you. And again, how to use that is very similar. The only difference that you can see here is we added tools as the namespace of the data source. So instead of being @sample, now it's @toolsample. So using syntax completion, you can see like all the different data sources that we have. Yeah. But in 3.2, we added new features in order to help you to use this. So everything that we saw was already available in 3.0. And in 3.2, we are adding a few things that Vadim is going to tell you about to help you using sample data.
So sample data is a great tool, but we love tools. And so we decided to put a UI on top of it. So what does it look like? I'm sure most of you already did that. So you have an image view. You're taking it from the palette, and the resource picker will pop up. And since you just started your project, you have only the launcher icon available, so you use it. And your preview doesn't look really great. So what you can do instead now, in the resource picker, you have the sample data category, and you can pick any resource data from your project or the predefined one. So now our image view looks better, and we can see every instant of it in our recycler view. But what if you want to make some change to this sample data? What if I just want to use one single image from my set? So we've introduced in Android Studio 3.2 the new design time helper that you can access by clicking the wrench icon right below the image view. So here, I'm going to uncheck Use as a Set. And this will give me the ability to select only one image from my set. And I can try it out with any image from this set. But now, let's say that we want to give it another look, and we want to pick images from another data set. So we can just use the drop-down button and select another data set. And here we go. Our recycler view has a brand new look. So it's really nice to preview what it would look like with different kind of images. So you can always jump back to the resource picker and have the full set of resources available by clicking the Browse button on the bottom of the pop-up. And the same options are available. And I also wanted to mention that if you select a sample data on the resource picker, it will populate the design time attribute, so it will be removed at runtime. We have the same design time helper for text view. So here, for example, I'm just selecting a different set for each view, for each text view. And as you can see on the recycler view, each item is taking one instance of each own set for each item, right? And finally, we've also added this feature for recycler view. And this is quite nice. You can browse between all the templates we provide for you, and the file will be automatically created, so you can just jump back to the created file and preview your changes. And all the design time attributes are automatically populated, so you don't have to do anything to preview it and take full advantage of sample data. But the layout editor is even more powerful if you use it with constraint layout. So Nicolas is going to come on stage and do a deep dive into constraint layout.
We released constraint layout officially in the stable version last year. We announced it a couple of years ago. So if you don't know about it, it's a library that allows you to easily create user interfaces. And we try to encourage you to use flat hierarchies, which is coming very handy for animations. It's a support library. It's compatible essentially everywhere. It's small, and you're in full control on when you ship with a specific version or not. It comes with a great UI builder that we have in Android Studio. And essentially, please, try to use it. It's something we're working really hard on to make your life easier. So we released ConstraintLayout 1.0 last year with a bunch of capabilities. You can set up your UI by creating relations between elements. There is a lot of capabilities here, relative positioning, center, et cetera, et cetera. And there is some helper objects like guidelines to help you set up your screen. So it's already a very full set of features. But a month ago, we released ConstraintLayout 1.1, which added a lot of bug fixes, performance improvements, new features, new ways of expressing your layout. And I'm just going to highlight one that you actually see on the slide, the barrier, which allows you to position an element relative to a set of elements. So whatever the position and the dimension of those elements, that element on the right is going to position correctly. So essentially, with ConstraintLayout 1.1, we have a really flexible layout, something that should essentially let you express any UI. And you can just add it to your project by using a normal Gradle dependency. We are now shipping on Maven, so it should be very easy for you to use it in your build server, etc. But I think a lot of you here are in this room to hear me talk about ConstraintLayout 2.0. So with ConstraintLayout 2.0, we are starting with ConstraintLayout 1, and ConstraintLayout 1 is a great base. As I said, it gives the entire flexibility that you need to create your UI, and it comes with the UI builder. And one of the concepts that we introduced in ConstraintLayout 1 was the concept of helper object that, even though you can manipulate them into the UI builder, they do not appear on your screen when you run the application. But essentially, they help you create your UI. So one of them is the guideline object. If your designer typically specify a UI with horizontal lines, etc., well, you can simply replicate those in your UI. So it's a lot easier for you to set up your screen. Similarly, with 1.1, we have the barrier I just talked about. And what's nice with those helpers objects is that we do have some support for them in the UI builder. So you can simply manipulate them and add elements to those helper objects in the component tree by dragging elements into them. Something you might not realize is that those helpers objects are not view groups. They only keep a reference to the views. So we still keep the entire view tree very flat. But because they are just references, we can have one object being referenced in multiple helpers. And that's starting to be very interesting for us. And you can think about the helpers as a way of keeping a reference to a bunch of views. You can still get a flat hierarchy. And the way we think about it is that a helper gives you a way of encapsulating a behavior. In 2.0, we are going to expose those helpers as the constraint helper class. So you'll be able to create your own helpers. And if you have your own helpers in your project, similar to what we have with custom views, they will be present in Android Studio. So you'll be able to manipulate your own objects. We kind of highlighted 3 broad categories for the helpers in 2.0. One category is layout manipulation, helpers that are going to help you create a layout. Another one is helpers that will apply something after the layout has been done, so kind of post-layout. And finally, we have some helpers, because helpers are views, or can be views as well, helpers that we can use to do some specific rendering, specific display. For the virtual layout, this is one of the concepts that we are really keen on. The idea is that the helper is going to set the constraint for you. The simplest example I can think of is a linear helper. If you created a chain in Constraint Layout 1, well, that will allow you to do exactly the same thing, but you will manipulate it a little bit like linear layout, for instance. The only difference is that you have all the features that chain provides you. And the way you use them, it's very easy. It's a normal view. You can constrain that view itself, but the only thing you need to care here is that list of IDs that you reference. We have another virtual layout that we'll launch with 2.0, which essentially implements the flexbox layout semantics. So those objects are pretty useful, but at the same time, I think pretty expected. But while we were developing those helpers, we came up with additional use cases. So one example of post-layout object is a flying object. Let's say that you want your object on first layout to fly in. Well, you could simply reference this object with the flying decorator, and that's all. So no code. It's purely declarative. You just add that to your XML file, reference that object, and it will animate on first launch. We have another object that's very powerful. Layers allows you essentially a lot of things. It kind of allows you to consider a set of views and apply operation to them. So there's a bunch of graphical operation that you can apply, and we will do the math behind the scene to apply them correctly. You can also set it up so that it takes by default the bounds of the views that it references, and you can use it to set up a background very easily that way. Another use case that we will expose is you could use the layer a little bit like you would use layers in graphical photo editors to have a bunch of layers to specify your elements. And when you are OK with those elements constraints, you could lock that layer and be sure to not inadvertently modify them. So it's a very powerful helper. Here is a quick example on how it would look like by drawing a background around a bunch of buttons being referenced. And without having to set up the constraint manually, I can easily surround those objects with a background. And just to prove you that we are still with a flat view tree, we can apply those operations that I'm talking about, and everything will just follow, but the background will stay where it is. So it's a silly example. It's just to show you the potential of those objects. Another useful decorator is a circular reveal. And it actually does what it says. And it's the typical effect that you've been familiar with material design. And if I press the button, that's better. The interesting thing here is that you'll notice that it only applies to the elements referenced. So we have this row of buttons that were not referenced. And so the circular reveal did not apply to them. And if you played with circular reveal, you'll see that it's actually a bit tricky to do that. The interesting thing here as well is that we are not creating our own circular reveal. We are just using the normal circular reveal. But essentially, we package it in a way that makes it a lot easier for you to play with and use in your layouts. So on that same idea, we have decorators that are helpers that are here to draw things. And same things, we reference views, and you can draw something with it. So that's probably a little confusing in terms of what type of effect you can get with that. So let me show you. So you may want an effect like that, kind of a lava lamp effect with those blobs moving around. And what you'll see is that the result of that effect will depend on the position of those blobs, but the final rendering has to take into account all of them. And that would normally be a very difficult effect to achieve. So the way it works with the helper is that you can think about it that way. You have a canvas, right, like what you paint on. You'll have actually some image views that are essentially sitting on top of that, and they are normal image views. So you lose nothing here. They are normal views, normal widgets. You can apply the usual things. But we put their background to be transparent, and then we use a decorator to draw the background. And you can easily get an effect like that. For instance, a little slower, There you go. So, and just to show you the bounds are correct, we still have our image views. Another type of decorator that you can use in your project is a bottom panel decorator. So let's say that you have a layout like that you may have created by using a chain. Very easy. But you'd like to set a background on those objects and maybe change their colors. So you can simply apply this decorator, reference those elements, and we'll do the rest of the work. And because, well, we can do a little more interesting stuff here, I can show you what it may look like when you click on those buttons. So just to give you an idea of the type of effects you can get with decorators. So I'm clicking on this, my menu comes in, I can press that, some other menu comes in, I press it, and there's a circular reveal. It's of course a very silly UI, but it's just to give you, an idea of what you can do. What's very interesting here is that if you look at it in Studio, and if I zoom on the component tree, you'll notice that actually, we mostly have just views and just a bunch of helpers. There is actually no code here. So I think it's a really useful addition to your toolset as a programmer to try to really separate, the feel with, the actual, your actual data and your actual behavior in your application. So to summarize with the helpers, you can tag your views with those, essentially. You can encapsulate and reuse the behavior, and it's all declarative. Let me talk briefly about layout management. So you've been probably playing with constraint set on the constraint layout 1.1, which is a way of encapsulating an entire state for a layout. And if you switch between two of those states, you can animate them. So that's very nice, but initializing those things is a little cumbersome. You have to create your layout, load those layouts manually, etc. So in 2.0, we'll have a separate XML file that lets you specify states, because essentially that's what they are. This is, I have a layout. That layout has different representation, the different states, and you can associate that with different layouts. So the way you would use them is simply by calling setLayoutDescription, and we'll do the rest of the job. You can then switch state simply by calling setState with the state ID, and that's it. One nice thing is that you can specify a region on when a specific constraint set is going to be applied. And by plugging that into onConfigurationChanged, and I'm showing that on a Chromebook, you'll see that automatically, depending on the size of the window, will switch layouts. So it's a very easy way for you to have different behavior for layouts. If you want a little more fancy, you can, on the preload change, plug a transition manager, and then we will animate the layout transition. So I think with devices like Chromebooks, that's the type of use case that are going to be more and more useful. And that's essentially layout management. So to quickly recap on Constraint Layout 2 so far, we have the Helpers API, we have those virtual layouts and decorators, we have the Resize API. We also have other stuff I haven't talked about, like a new Fluent API for manipulating the constraints directly. And we have motion layouts. And to talk about motion layouts, I'm really happy to introduce John.
Thanks. Okay. Now, I'm really excited to show you guys motion layout. It's a brand new layout that we're introducing with Constraint Layout 2.2. So let's kind of get into it. It starts off with a subclass of Constraint Layout called Motion Layout. It's a layout. It has all the properties of Constraint Layout. But the whole trick with animating between two constraint sets, will be done for you by Motion Layout. So if you have two constraint sets, it will switch between them and animate between them by itself. But you notice, because it's a constraint layout, you can actually use the helpers that were shown there. But it also provides you with the ability to edit the custom attributes of the system. So you notice the blue light there? It's changing because it's a custom attribute in the system. So constraint sets now can handle custom attributes, allows you to animate anything. One of the other things that it does is it allows you to control on-touch directly. So it'll manage your touch events by tracking your velocity of your finger and matching it to the velocity of views in the system, and naturally give you a smooth transition between them via touch. We also support helpers because it's just a constraint layout. So the helpers Nicolas just showed, they're there too. And they can work together and apart. Now, let's change the transition a little bit. We want to move the eye into the middle of the screen. But if we look closely, there's a bit of a problem here. You see the arrow clashes with the eye. We'll have to fix that. And the way we do that is a feature we call keyframes. Essentially, if we have a beginning and an end of a path, we can distort the path by adding a keyframe. And once we add the keyframe, it'll avoid the path. This is pretty cool. So now we have a motion scene. It has constraint sets. It has on-touch, keyframes, custom attributes. With a little flag on your device, you can see the path of all the objects you've set in it. So you can understand what all your views are doing on device. So one of the nice things that we've supported in it is nesting of constraint sets, of motion layouts. So in this particular example, we have two views being animated by a third view. They're both constraint motion layouts, and they are both being driven by a third motion layout. The top view is just doing a fade to black, but you'll notice something else in that view. This is an animated view that was custom written by Nicolas that is being driven by motion layout because it implements an on-progress method. So you can drive your own custom animations directly from motion layout. So one of the things it's really good at is synchronizing motions. Anything that's very complex, sequences of many things moving on the screen, it'll handle it, and it'll also allow you to interact with it with the touch. So we added one more thing to the system, something we call cycles. This is the ability to build into the keyframes oscillatory behaviors. It can vibrate and shake in various ways. And you might wonder, OK, so what do we do with these key cycles? So in this particular example, first, let me just unfold them with a staggered effect. But now I can take one and have it roll because it's an oscillator. Or I can do a different effect. I could have it sort of bounce along the edge. I got bored, and I just had that one flying around. Another typical example is you put it like doing a little shake at the end. So now one of the cool things is we build editors. So we're building an editor for that thing. We call it the motion editor. It's part of the design surface. But now you'll be able to do those edits directly in the design surface. So kind of to take you through how you would do that in the design surface, based on constraints layout, you just create your constraints for your first constraint set, switch to the second, edit the constraints for the second constraint set. And then once you do that, if you hit play, it will show you the animation between those two constraint sets. There's a checkbox to enable showing you the path. So now you can see the path. But how would you add a keyframe? Well, you just position the cursor where you want it. You add the type of keyframe that you want to add. And you can just distort the position by selecting the keyframe and moving it around on the screen. And let's just do that one more time so you can see it. Just select a position, any position, create a keyframe, and then we just move it. So here's much more complex motions. They're all being animated. This one has quite a few keyframes in it, just designed to allow you to set transparency on some things, change the size of other things, move them around. But it all works in the IDE. Thank you.
Very good.
So one last thing, you probably are eager to try all those things. So a lot of that is actually 3.2. All the sample data we showed you, all the current integration with Constraint Layout 1.1. Go, download 3.2, try it out. We released the Canary 13 this Tuesday, so please give it a try. Constraint Layout 2, the library with motion layout, we are thinking about releasing it in a few days, hopefully. And motion editor, it's an ongoing work, but we are really excited about it. So think about it. There is code labs for the navigation editor as well, for the Chrome resize API we showed you. We also want to hear from you in general. We are easily reachable, the four of us, but for this particular session, there is feedback you can fill. We are also going to have an office hour this afternoon after this session, so please come see us. And that concludes our talk. Thank you very much.